I didn't set out to question the foundations of electrical history. I'm not that person. I believed what I was taught, that Tesla was a visionary ahead of his time, that Edison won the current wars, that wireless power was a dream that never materialized, that our grid of copper wires and power plants represented humanity's first successful attempt at electrical distribution. But then I stood at the base of what remained of a tower foundation in Lower Manhattan, and something didn't add up. The concrete anchor points descended 40 feet into bedrock. Massive iron rings, each one 3 feet in diameter, still embedded in stone. Copper conduits running in precise geometric patterns toward what was once a water table. And at street level, 4 massive stone pedestals positioned at perfect cardinal points, each one scarred where metal had been violently removed. The official explanation? Remnants of a failed experimental telegraph tower dismantled for safety in 1897. Failed. That word haunted me because nothing about this foundation suggested failure. Every element seemed engineered with precision that bordered on obsession. The depth wasn't random. The metal compositions weren't experimental. The geometric layout wasn't aesthetic. This was functional infrastructure built to exacting specifications, then deliberately erased from the record. The deeper I looked, the more the official narrative began to collapse. Let me show you what I mean. Take the towers. Not just any towers, but the specific architectural pattern that appears with unsettling precision across 6 continents during a 60-year window. Chicago, 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition. Photographs show dozens of identical metal towers, each one crowned with massive copper spheres, arising from ornate stone bases, with foundations that workers complained descended impossibly deep into the lakebed. Paris, 1889, the Exposition Universelle. Before the Eiffel Tower became the icon, the fairgrounds featured a network of smaller towers, each one topped with gilded spheres and positioned at precise intervals. Official records claim they were decorative lighting structures, yet the electrical systems of the time couldn't possibly have required such elaborate foundations or such specific positioning. St. Petersburg, Russia. Between 1890 and 1905, tower networks appeared atop government buildings and across palace grounds. Identical copper-topped spires, identical foundation depths, identical spacing patterns. Melbourne, Buenos Aires, Montreal, Johannesburg. The pattern repeats and repeats and repeats. These aren't similar structures. They're the same structure, built according to the same specifications, using the same materials, following the same mathematical principles. The towers weren't just metal poles, they were layered systems. Copper coils visible in construction photographs, iron frameworks descending to water tables, stone bases containing what engineers called peculiar crystalline aggregates, grounding systems that extended horizontally through underground conduits to other towers in the network. Ask yourself, why does a decorative exposition tower in Chicago need a foundation that descends 60 feet through clay into bedrock? Why does a lightning rod in St. Petersburg require 3 separate grounding systems radiating outward in a 6-pointed star pattern? Why do all of these structures, built supposedly by different engineers in different countries who had no contact with each other, employ the same exact proportions, height to base ratio of precisely 7.83 to 1? The official explanation collapses here. We're told these were experiments, decorative elements, or safety lightning rods that proliferated through architectural fashion. But fashion doesn't dictate engineering specifications down to the millimeter. Fashion doesn't demand that every tower be positioned in precise metal alloys, in precise layered arrangements. Fashion doesn't demand that every tower be positioned at mathematically determined intervals, or that their foundations must reach specific geological strata regardless of surface conditions.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Let me walk you through the components, not as an architect sees them, but as an electrical engineer might. The spheres, copper, sometimes gilded, always positioned at the apex. These weren't decorative caps or simple lightning attractors. They were capacitors. Hollow spheres ranging from 3 to 12 feet in diameter, their interior surfaces often lined with additional conductive materials. The perfect shape for accumulating and storing electrical charge from atmospheric sources. The geometry isn't coincidental. A sphere provides maximum surface area for its volume, optimal for charge accumulation. Many show evidence of segmented construction, panels that could be adjusted or replaced, suggesting they were tuned for specific frequencies or capacities. The patina patterns on surviving examples show unusual wear concentrated at specific points, exactly where you'd expect discharge or high current flow. The tower shafts, not solid poles, but sophisticated coil structures. Construction photographs reveal this clearly when you know what to look for. Helical copper windings around iron cores, insulated with materials that shouldn't have existed in the 1890s. The coils weren't single layer, they were nested, primary, secondary, sometimes tertiary windings, each with different wire gauges and turn counts. If you've studied Tesla coils, the resemblance is undeniable. These weren't communication antennas. They were resonant transformers designed to step up voltage from ground-level collection systems to the high-potential spheres above. The foundations. This is where it gets extraordinary. Stone bases containing granite, limestone, and quartz aggregates in specific ratios. These aren't structural choices, they're electrical choices. Granite contains crystalline quartz that exhibits piezoelectric properties. Limestone, under pressure or vibration, generates measurable charge. The foundations weren't just supporting weight, they were active components, converting mechanical stress and earth currents into electrical potential. And the grounding systems. Copper rods, sometimes copper-clad iron, driven deep into earth until they reached water tables or specific mineral strata. But they didn't stop there. Horizontal conduits connected each tower to its neighbors, creating networks. In Chicago, workers documented conduits running between towers through underground tunnels. In Paris, mysterious copper-lined channels were discovered in later excavations, their purpose officially unexplained. The metals connect. Tower to foundation, foundation to earth, foundation to water, foundation to neighbor, one continuous conductive pathway from sky to ground to neighbor, engineered with precision that our ancestors supposedly didn't possess. Not just in one location, globally, simultaneously, according to identical specifications. If you're finding this investigation compelling, consider subscribing or becoming a member. Your support helps preserve research into technologies that were never meant to be forgotten. Now here's where it gets stranger. These towers aren't just built with conductive materials and resonant frequencies. They're built according to specific geometric ratios that appear nowhere in the architectural textbooks of the era. The golden ratio appears constantly. Tower height to base diameter, sphere diameter to shaft height, spacing between towers in a network, foundation depth to tower height, all conforming to 1.618, the mathematical relationship that ancient cultures claimed could harness and amplify natural forces. The spacing patterns follow Fibonacci sequences. First tower, second tower 1.6 times the distance, third tower 2.6 times, following the additive sequence. Not approximately, exactly. Measured in modern surveys of tower foundation remnants, the error average averages less than 3 inches across distances of thousands of feet. Sacred geometry that the Parthenon employed, that the pyramids embodied, that Gothic cathedrals incorporated into their designs to create spaces that resonated with divine frequencies.
And now these late 19th century towers, all following the same mathematical principles, all incorporating the same geometric relationships, all engineered to vibrate at specific frequencies when wind or electromagnetic flux pass through them. Modern engineers will tell you this is about stability, about structural optimization through trial and error. But trial and error doesn't produce identical solutions on 6 continents within a 20-year window. Optimization doesn't require that every angle be calculated to fractions of a degree for structures that official history claims were merely decorative. And stability doesn't explain why these towers, according to maintenance records that survive, required periodic tuning, adjustment of coil tensions, modification of sphere segments, recalibration of grounding depths.
These towers hummed. Workers reported it constantly. Not metaphorically, they vibrated at frequencies people could feel. Maintenance logs mention resonant interference between towers if spacing was incorrect. Newspaper accounts describe electrical sensations near the tower bases during thunderstorms. One Chicago engineer in 1894 documented measuring significant potential differences between tower apex and ground during clear weather conditions, a phenomenon he couldn't explain with contemporary electrical theory. This is where the official history becomes untenable. Between 1885 and 1897, these structures appeared worldwide. Not gradually, not with clear lines of technological development, but simultaneously. The same designs, the same materials, the same engineering specifications, the same mathematical precision. From Chicago to St. Petersburg, from Paris to Melbourne, the pattern repeats, with variations so minor they appeared to be working from identical blueprints. The coordination problem becomes insoluble. How do you explain identical coil winding patterns down to wire gauge and turn count in towers separated by oceans? How do you account for the same foundation depths, the same geometric ratios, the same grounding system architectures being built simultaneously by cultures that supposedly had minimal technical exchange? How do you rationalize the fact that these towers appear to be nodes in a network, positioned at intervals that only make sense if you're trying to create overlapping fields of electromagnetic influence, all oriented to precise cardinal directions, all without any documented master plan? You can't, not without acknowledging what the evidence screams. These towers were part of a system, a coordinated, engineered global system designed to do something we've been taught was impossible without copper wires strung between poles and centralized generating stations. And here's the strangest part. After 1897, it stops. Not gradually, abruptly. The construction of these towers ceases almost overnight. More than that, the demolition begins. 1897 marks the turning point. In that single year, tower removal orders appear in municipal records across America, Europe, and Australia. The justifications vary, but the timing doesn't. Chicago, the Exposition Towers, which had stood for 4 years after the fair, were ordered dismantled in spring 1897. Official reason? Structural concerns and aesthetic blight. Yet the exposition buildings themselves, far larger and supposedly more temporary, stood for years longer. New York, at least 7 documented tower structures received demolition orders between 1897 and 1899. Municipal records cite lightning hazard repeatedly, despite these same cities installing conventional lightning rods on other buildings without concern. Paris, the Exposition Towers, excluding Eiffel's Iron Giant, were removed in 1897. Berlin, Vienna, Brussels, similar patterns. St. Petersburg ordered the removal of decorative electrical apparatus from government buildings in 1898. The specificity of that language is telling. Not towers, not antennas, electrical apparatus. And it wasn't just removal, it was erasure.
The towers were dismantled carefully, methodically. The copper was salvaged and reportedly sold as scrap, though at volumes that contemporary metal markets could possibly not have absorbed. The foundations were filled with rubble or concrete. The grounding systems were excavated and removed, often to depths that required more effort than the original installation. Photographs document this, before and after images of city squares, exposition grounds, government buildings, towers present in 1896, absent by 1898. But here's what the photographs also show. The demolition was systematic, not chaotic teardown, but careful disassembly. Components were removed in sequence, spheres first, then coils, then structural elements, then foundations, as if someone wanted the materials or wanted to ensure nothing functional remained. The engineering journals from 1897 to 1903 are extraordinary for what they don't say. These publications had documented the construction of these structures in elaborate detail. Now, silence. No discussion of why thousands of installations were suddenly deemed obsolete or dangerous. No technical debate about the lightning hazard claims. No financial analysis of the enormous costs involved in removal. Just occasional brief notices. The tower at X location has been removed per municipal order.
Newspaper archives tell a different story, but you have to read between the lines. Articles from 1897 through 1903 mention the removals, often in local news sections. Ornamental tower removed from Courthouse Square. City council votes to dismantle fair structures. Buried in these notices are details that don't quite fit. Claims of electrical interference with new systems. Complaints from emerging power companies about unauthorized current draw. References to hazardous resonance effects that were never properly explained. And then there are the incidents. Boston, 1898. A tower scheduled for removal was struck by lightning during a clear sky storm. The discharge was described as unlike any lightning previously observed, creating a continuous arc for nearly 30 seconds. The tower was removed within a week. San Francisco, 1999. Workers dismantling a tower foundation reported severe electrical shocks from no identifiable source when they began excavating the grounding systems. The project was completed overnight by a crew from an unnamed private company. St. Petersburg, 1902. An entire network of towers was removed from palace grounds under military supervision. The official explanation, modernization, but correspondence between government officials, declassified decades later, references interference with state communications and unauthorized power manifestation. Whatever that meant, it was serious enough to require armed supervision of the demolition. The timing. It coincides exactly with something else: the rise of centralized electrical power grids. In 1897, Edison and Westinghouse were locked in the final phase of the current wars. Cities were beginning to install wired distribution systems. Power companies were securing monopoly contracts. And these contracts included clauses buried in the legal language prohibiting alternative electrical apparatus within city limits. New York's 1898 power contract with Consolidated Edison contained such a clause. So did Chicago's 1999 agreement. Philadelphia, Boston, San Francisco, the pattern repeats. Within 2 years of signing these contracts, all documented towers in those cities were gone. The demolitions weren't random. They targeted specific types of towers. Those with the most elaborate coil systems, the deepest foundations, the most extensive grounding networks, the ones positioned in geometric relationship to others. Standalone decorative structures often remained, but anything that looked like it could be part of a network, gone. This raises a simple but critical question. What if these towers threatened something? What if their very existence contradicted a new system being implemented?
What if they demonstrated a technology that was being actively replaced? Let me be clear about what I'm suggesting. These towers, with their copper spheres, resonant coils, crystalline foundations, and elaborate grounding networks, they weren't designed for the purposes we've been taught, not primarily. The exposition displays, the courthouse ornaments, the palace decorations, these weren't just civic beautification. They were infrastructure, energy infrastructure. The evidence suggests they were designed to harness, store, and transmit electrical energy without wires. Here's how the system would have worked based on the engineering evidence we can still examine. The spheres as atmospheric collectors. The upper atmosphere contains a constant electrical potential difference from ground level, the atmospheric electric field, measured in volts per meter. It varies with weather, solar activity, and cosmic ray flux, but it's always present. A large conductive sphere at elevation acts as a natural accumulator of that potential. The higher the sphere, the greater the potential difference it can accumulate. This isn't theoretical, it's measurable physics. The coils as resonant transformers. Once you've accumulated charge in the sphere, you need to convert it to usable potential. Tesla demonstrated this principle with his coils, resonant air core transformers that could step up voltage to extraordinary levels through electromagnetic resonance. The tower coils weren't single-purpose. Primary windings connected to the grounding system, secondary windings connected to the sphere. Tune the resonant frequency correctly, and you create a standing wave that amplifies the potential difference between Earth and sky. The foundations as capacitors and ground connections. The crystalline aggregates in the stone bases weren't decorative. Quartz, under mechanical stress or electromagnetic flux, generates measurable voltage, the piezoelectric effect. A foundation containing tons of quartz-bearing granite, subjected to the vibration of a resonant tower and the electromagnetic fields it's generating, becomes an active component. It stores charge, it releases charge, it couples the tower to earth currents flowing through the ground.
The grounding networks as distribution systems. Here's where it gets revolutionary. If multiple towers are connected through underground conduits, and each tower is resonating at the same frequency, you create a network. Energy collected at one tower can be transferred through the ground connections to other towers. The entire network becomes one distributed system, with each tower acting as both collector and transmitter. Standing waves in the Earth itself. Tesla proposed this in his wireless power patents. Use the Earth as a conductor. Establish standing waves through resonant transmission, and any receiver tuned to the same frequency could extract power from those standing waves. The tower networks, positioned at precise intervals, would have created exactly such a system. Overlapping fields, resonant coupling, distributed energy that could be accessed anywhere within the network. A wireless energy system. Global, coordinated, functional, and then erased. Not destroyed completely, that would be too obvious. Instead, redefined. The technology was dismantled, but the narrative was left intact. We're taught these were experiments, decorative structures, failed attempts at wireless communication. We're told Tesla was a visionary who never succeeded, that wireless power was a dream that proved impossible, that Edison's wired grid was the only solution that worked. But what if that's backwards? What if wireless power was working, was deployed, was functional across multiple cities and countries? And what if the wired grid wasn't progress, it was replacement? Replacement of a system that was free to access, distributed, impossible to meter or control, with a system that could be owned, metered, and sold by the kilowatt hour? The silence was deafening.
No debate about the transition from tower networks to wired distribution. No discussion of why thousands of precisely engineered towers were suddenly obsolete. No explanation for how decorative or experimental structures that cost fortunes to install became expendable overnight. No technical analysis of whether the towers actually worked or what they were designed to do. Just a quiet rewriting of history that left the foundations buried, the photographs mislabeled, and the engineering principles forgotten. I stand again at that foundation in Manhattan, the iron rings still embedded in bedrock, oxidized now, but unmistakable in their precision. The copper conduits running in geometric patterns toward where other towers once stood. The massive stone pedestals with their violent removal scars. And I'm left with questions that historical aphorism cannot answer. Why did humanity build these structures with such precision, such coordination, such identical engineering across the entire globe? Why did they stop so abruptly in 1897? Why were the towers dismantled with such care, such completeness? Why were the grounding systems excavated rather than simply abandoned? Why has the engineering knowledge behind them been so thoroughly forgotten that modern electrical engineers don't even recognize what they're looking at when they see the evidence? What did these towers do? Not what were they called in official records, not what purpose they were supposedly built for, but what were they engineered to do? What technology did they embody? What system did they serve? And perhaps most unsettling, who decided that this system should end? The coordination required to dismantle a global network in less than a decade rivals the coordination required to build it. Who had that authority? Who had that reach? Who had that motivation? Municipal governments acted in concert. Engineering journals fell silent in unison. Power companies across continents inserted identical contract language. Patents related to wireless power transmission were bought up and buried by shell companies whose ownership records have since disappeared. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, his attempt to demonstrate wireless power transmission at scale, lost its funding in 1903, was dismantled in 1917, and has been discussed ever since as proof the technology couldn't work. But what if Wardenclyffe wasn't a failure? What if it was a threat? A reminder of a system that had already been erased, being rebuilt by someone who remembered how it worked. The deeper I've gone into this investigation, the more I've realized something profound. We didn't invent electrical power distribution, we replaced it. We replaced a system we can still see the foundations of, literally, with a system that requires copper wires, coal-fired generators, and centralized control. We replaced something that was free, distributed, and already built with something that could be owned, metered, and sold by the kilowatt hour. And then we forgot, or we were made to forget.
The foundations remain, buried beneath city streets and courthouse squares, silent witnesses to a technology we've been taught never existed. Their iron rings still embedded in bedrock, their copper conduits still running through underground passages we've sealed and forgotten, their stone bases still containing the crystalline aggregates chosen for properties we no longer acknowledge. The photographs remain in archives and historical societies, showing the towers in their full complexity, the coils visible during construction, the spheres gleaming at their apex, the grounding systems being excavated to extraordinary depths, the network layouts that only make sense if you understand what you're looking at. The removal scars remain on buildings that once supported tower structures, 4 pedestals at cardinal points, their tops sheared flat where metal was violently removed,
anchor points filled with concrete, conduit openings sealed with brick. The evidence is there if you know what to look for. The municipal records remain, documenting the demolitions in bureaucratic language that raises more questions than it answers. Lightning hazards that required removal of some towers but not others. Electrical interference that was never technically explained. Private companies hired to dismantle public structures. Costs that don't appear in city budgets. The newspaper accounts remain, describing phenomena we're told shouldn't have been possible. Continuous electrical arcs during clear sky storms, measurable potential differences between tower and ground, resonant effects between towers in a network, workers receiving shocks from foundations disconnected from any power source. And the physics remains. The atmospheric electric field that exists whether we use it or not, the piezoelectric properties of quartz-bearing stone, the resonant principles of air core transformers, the ability of standing waves to transmit energy through conductive media. None of this is controversial. It's all established science. The only controversial claim is that someone used these principles at scale in a global network before we supposedly invented wireless power. Once you see it, once you understand the pattern, the precision, the impossible global coordination, the systematic demolition, the rewriting of history, you can't unsee it. These towers were designed to harness free energy from the atmosphere and Earth. The knowledge was systematically erased, and the evidence is hiding in plain sight in every foundation anchor point still visible in city squares, in every before and after photograph showing towers present, then absent, in every municipal record documenting removal of electrical apparatus without explaining what that apparatus did. Ask yourself, what else have we forgotten? What other technologies are hiding in our infrastructure, in our historical photographs, in the foundations beneath our cities? What other systems were replaced rather than invented? What other knowledge was buried beneath layers of official explanation that collapse under examination? The answers are there, in the iron and copper still embedded in bedrock, in the geometric patterns of foundations positioned according to ratios we no longer use, in the removal scars that mark where something powerful enough to require systematic demolition once stood. We just have to remember how to see them and to ask why someone needed us to forget. What did these towers do? Not what were they called in official records, not what purpose they were supposedly built for, but what were they engineered to do? What technology did they embody? What system did they serve? And perhaps most unsettling, who decided that this system should end? The coordination required to dismantle a global network in less than a decade rivals the coordination required to build it. Who had that authority? Who had that reach? Who had that motivation? Municipal governments acted in concert. Engineering journals fell silent in unison. Power companies across continents inserted identical contract language. Patents related to wireless power transmission were bought up and buried by shell companies whose ownership records have since disappeared. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, his attempt to demonstrate wireless power transmission at scale, lost its funding in 1903, was dismantled in 1917, and has been discussed ever since as proof the technology couldn't work. But what if Wardenclyffe wasn't a failure? What if it was a threat? A reminder of a system that had already been erased, being rebuilt by someone who remembered how it worked. The deeper I've gone into this investigation, the more I've realized something profound. We didn't invent electrical power distribution. We replaced it. We replaced a system we can still see the foundations of, literally, with a system that requires copper wires, coal-fired generators, and centralized control. We replaced something that was free, distributed, and already built with something that could be owned, metered, and sold. And then we forgot, or we were made to forget. The towers were redefined as decorative, experimental, or failed. The engineering principles were dismissed as impossible or impractical. The global coordination was explained away as architectural fashion. The precise timing of the demolitions was treated as coincidence. But the evidence remains.